The Vietnam War engulfed Southeast Asia from 1955 to 1975, a tumultuous conflict that pitted the communist North against the capitalist South, igniting tensions that reverberated across the globe. The key players were many: North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh; South Vietnam, supported by the US, and the Soviet Union, backing the North. The United States justified its involvement under the domino theory, believing that if one nation fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow. As the war escalated in the 1960s, American society became a cauldron of unrest. Soldiers were drafted, protests erupted, and a generation grappled with disillusionment. The streets erupted with calls for peace, love, and justice. But amidst this turmoil, an unexpected silence emerged, one born from the venerable institution of the Catholic Church. In the 1960s, the Catholic Church held substantial sway over American society. It was a time when mass attendance was high, and religious institutions acted as beacons of moral authority. The bishops wielded considerable influence, shaping public opinion and ethical discourse. Their voices carried weight. Yet, as the war intensified, their response was strikingly muted. Traditionally, the Catholic bishops held strong positions on matters of war and peace. The Church taught the just war theory, emphasizing that warfare could be morally justifiable under specific conditions. But the Vietnam War challenged this doctrine. The brutality of the conflict, the staggering civilian casualties, and the visceral images of warfare broadcast across homes horrified many. Protesters took to the streets, chanting for peace, but the bishops remained largely silent. Their absence felt like a gaping hole in the moral fabric of the nation. This silence was laden with implications. A disconnect emerged between the bishops and their congregations, who sought guidance amid an ethical crisis. With the teachings of Christ emphasizing compassion and peace, the bishops' failure to voice opposition left many questioning their integrity and commitment to social justice. The Church's leadership faced accusations of complicity, and, in the eyes of many, their silence was tantamount to betrayal. Unsurprisingly, myriad factors silenced their voices. The Cold War loomed large, and constant threats from Soviet influence made the conflict seem justifiable. The bishops feared that aligning too closely with anti-war sentiments could potentially undermine national security or alienate Catholic communities that supported the war. This precarious balance left them teetering on the edge of relevance, caught between allegiance to doctrine and the socio-political landscape. Amidst this turmoil, certain bishops attempted to speak out. Figures like Bishop Thomas Gumbleton voiced concerns, urging for the Church to embrace its prophetic role. However, these voices were exceptions, not the norm. The prevailing attitude favored caution, as silence reigned supreme among the majority. As the bodies stacked up overseas, the hope for a vocal ecclesiastical opposition faded. Lost was the unique opportunity for the bishops to lead the faithful through a painful critique of the war, a moment that could have reshaped the Church's relationship with both its followers and the nation. Why did these influential bishops, supposed leaders of morality, opt for silence in a time of crisis? What were the unspoken fears that paralyzed them? The seemingly unanswered questions of faith, politics, and integrity beckon us to explore further into the narrative of the Catholic bishops during the Vietnam War. What lies hidden behind this shroud of silence? As the Vietnam War escalated in the 1960s, the silence of the Catholic bishops became a deafening echo amid a cacophony of rising dissent. While American streets filled with protesters chanting for peace, the bishops, a powerful body, struggled to voice their discontent. They had previously stood as champions of justice. Now, many remained muted. In public statements, the bishops cautiously navigated the treacherous waters of wartime rhetoric. The National Conference of Catholic Bishops in 1965 issued an ambiguous statement that called for peace but fell short of openly denouncing the U.S. military involvement. Instead of explicit opposition, they expressed great sorrow over the conflict, while serious concerns about the consequences of war lingered unvoiced. This half-hearted approach left a distinct gap between the hierarchy and the laity. Those sitting in pews were increasingly hungry for clear moral guidance. Meanwhile, the laity erupted in anti-war sentiment. Catholic youth joined marches, invoked the Church's teachings on peace, and challenged the silence of their leaders. In the heart of America, parishes became arenas of debate, as fervent voices questioned the church's complicity in this conflict. Yet the bishops, consumed by Cold War fears and pressure from pro-war factions, generally chose silence over confrontation. They feared that vocal opposition might alienate the very congregation some bishops relied upon for support. Bishop Thomas Gumbleton of Detroit stood as a lone dissenting voice. He publicly criticized U.S. policy in Vietnam and connected it to broader themes of social justice and peace. Gumbleton's rhetoric clashed with his peers, who, while privately concerned, felt compelled to maintain a dignified neutrality. In stark contrast, Archbishop John Dearden of Detroit, though more progressive, still refrained from making firm public statements against the war, focusing instead on reconciliation and peace efforts that lacked specific denunciations of the government's actions. The dissonance became glaring. Some bishops, like Gumbleton, aligned their faith with their conscience, declaring, "We cannot support a war that is unjust." Others, however, chose silence or offered muted support for the administration's position, fearing backlash. This split laid bare a harsh reality. The church was not unified. It reflected a deeper betrayal. When the moral authority of the church fell silent, a significant portion of its followers felt abandoned amidst the cries for justice. The bishop's silence started to fray the trust within the church. Many parishioners gravitated toward lay-led movements, forming organizations that explicitly challenged U.S. policies in Vietnam. They demanded more from their leaders, yearning for guidance that emphasized the profound ethical implications of war. The disconnect deepened, and soon cracks began to emerge. As anti-war sentiments reached a fever pitch, a crucial question loomed over the hierarchy. Would they remain silent, or would they find their voices amid the din of a nation divided? And as the war raged on, the American public watched. They wondered, what would it take for the bishops to break their silence? Would moral clarity finally emerge, or would the church continue to watch as a silent witness, risking further estrangement from its vital, questioning flock? The silence of the Catholic bishops echoed through parishes and communities, cementing a growing sense of betrayal among the faithful. For many lay Catholics, the bishops' reluctance to speak out against the Vietnam War felt like a denial of their moral obligation to advocate for peace and justice. The unexpected void left room for dissent, prompting a movement among the laity to fill the silence with their own cries for conscience. Within the heart of the church, the gap widened. While some bishops hesitated, fearing backlash or division, lay Catholics felt an urgent call to action. Parishioners began to pen letters, distress signals from the faithful, urging their leaders to stand firm against what they saw as an unjust war. The handwritten notes illustrated a desperate plea for clarity at a time when clarity was desperately needed. How can we remain silent while innocent lives are lost? Read one letter directed to a local bishop. Other missives detailed the anguish of families torn apart by the conflict, imploring church leaders to recognize the toll of war. Anti-war articles surfaced in church bulletins, and grassroots discussions proliferated during coffee hours. These lay-led initiatives wielded a striking contrast to the bishop's cautious approach. The sentiments intensified in the late 1960s as the escalation of U.S. troop deployments unleashed waves of dissent across the nation. Inspired by movements advocating for civil rights and social justice, many lay Catholics found their voices. They rallied, organized protests, and openly questioned why their bishops remained mute. Catholics began to ask, where is our church in this? As public sentiment shifted, so too did expectations. The laity demanded leadership, not just from the pulpit, but from those who held authority. This pressure manifested vividly in public forums. Across the country, Catholics attended town hall meetings, and some visibly questioned bishops directly about their silence. On college campuses, students pressed for peace alongside their beliefs, leading to conversations that echoed far beyond church walls. Publications came alive with the fervor of the faithful. Catholic magazines, once reserved for prayer and reflection, now bore the weight of dissent. Articles criticized the bishops' lack of action, calling for them to act as moral guides. One bold piece, written by a group of concerned Catholic youth, called the silence deafening. urging bishops to act rather than passively watch the violence unfold. The discontent was palpable. Some bishops responded with discomfort, while others dismissed dissent as misguided. They underestimated the resolve of an emerging generation of lay leaders who were unwilling to accept silence as a norm. The sentiments reached a boiling point when prominent figures, priests, nuns, and laypeople, began to speak out publicly. Their calls for peace clamored for attention, and a new understanding of faith began to take shape, one that demanded justice alongside belief. Yet in the shadows loomed questions of authority, loyalty, and the very foundations of faith. How could the Catholic Church reconcile its teachings of peace with the inaction of its leaders? Would the bishops ever find the courage to unite with their flock? As the decade wore on, the tension between silence and action reached a cresting point, setting the stage for a reckoning unlike any other. What would emerge from this chasm of discontent? Would the bishops finally break their silence, or would dissent within the church spark a larger revolution? The answer lay just beyond the horizon of this tumultuous time. The Catholic bishops' silence during the Vietnam War left profound scars on the church and American society. Their reluctance to speak out against a war that claimed millions of lives was not merely a matter of ecclesiastical decorum. It set in motion a dichotomy of faith and action that would echo through decades. As the war dragged on, the rift between the bishops and their congregations widened. Many lay Catholics felt abandoned. This was a betrayal by leaders who stood for peace, yet failed to challenge the very foundations of violence before them. Fueled by this sense of betrayal, grassroots movements surged. The Catholic Peace Fellowship emerged, advocating for a struggle rooted in gospel values. College students led protests, connecting their faith directly to the demand for justice. This burgeoning political consciousness turned from a mere echo into a powerful choir, challenging the bishop's authority. Historians scrutinize this silence, labeling it a critical misstep. Critics argue that by neglecting to address such a crucial moral crisis, these bishops relinquished their spiritual leadership at a pivotal moment in history. Their inaction is often seen as a failure to uphold their own teachings on the sanctity of life and justice, leaving laypeople wondering who truly guided the flock. Yet, defenders of the bishops offer a different lens. They point to the complexities of church-state relations during the 1960s. The bishops faced immense pressures. Some believed their silence preserved the church's position and influence in a rapidly changing society. The fear of alienating followers who supported the war weighed heavily on them. Confronted with political backlash and the challenge of maintaining unity, some bishops opted for silence, hoping to navigate the tumultuous waters of American politics. However, this perceived prudence may have had a cost. The long-term effects rippled through Catholic communities. As lay activism grew, many began to prioritize social justice over rigid loyalty to clerical authority. New movements emerged, demanding clarity and engagement from the church on not just war, but on issues like racial injustice, poverty, and the environment. The bishop's silence had inadvertently sparked a revolution of thought among the faithful, redefining the church's role in advocacy. This tension climaxed in the 1970s and beyond, as new generations of Catholics challenged traditional narratives. The Second Vatican Council, convened just before the escalation of the war, had opened the door for modernization and engagement. But many lay people felt their bishops failed to fully embrace that spirit. The Church's involvement in social justice, a keystone of Catholic teaching, came to the forefront, spurring a more dynamic relationship between the laity and clergy. But the legacy of the bishop's silence poses an ongoing question. Can the Catholic Church fully reconcile its historical inaction during Vietnam with today's call for justice and activism? How do institutions learn from their silence? As the Church faces the modern landscape of social issues, echoes of the Vietnam War still haunt its corridors. The question lingers: will history repeat itself, or will the voices of the faithful finally compel the bishops to take a stand?